Welcome to all. We really appreciate you coming to our kickoff of our Lunch and Learns in terms of why must women be at the forefront of a pandemic recovery that leaves no one behind. We welcome all who are joining us and really appreciate you taking out some of the time during this day and during this busy period for everybody to really join in and you know engage with us about this important issue and the series of issues that we're going to be holding over the next few weeks, a couple weeks. We want to begin right away so that we also are respectful of the time that you set aside. And we want to start off with Karen Sutton, our BC Women's Coordinator. She'll give us a land acknowledgement, and then I'll introduce some of the other folks who will be with us today to chat with y'all. Thanks.
Thanks, Monica. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. I just want to take a moment for us all to consider the relationships that we have with the Indigenous peoples and the Indigenous lands that each one of us sit on while we're here today. I want to give thanks to the Silic Nation for the opportunity to participate today from their stolen land. And I hope that each one of you can take a moment and give thanks to where you are coming to us today from. Excuse me. I'm a proud Mohawk woman, and I have such gratitude for being here today with all of you, and thankful for the opportunity to sit with Danyel and have a great conversation. And I hope that you all enjoy your time here. Thank you. All my relations.
Thanks, Karen. So as I was mentioning earlier, that's Karen Sutton, our PSAC BC Regional Coordinator for Women. And for those of you who I have not yet had an opportunity to meet, my name is Monica Urrutia. Pardon my croaky throat. I'm a regional rep out of the Vancouver office, and I'd like to acknowledge the lands that I'm on are the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, Stolo, and Squamish nations. That's been important for me to also acknowledge because the city that I happen to live in borders on so many shared nations, and it's interesting to try to learn about each nation individually, even though these are shared territories. So that's been something that I've been trying to do for the last little while, and it's still endeavoring to do so. With us, as Danielle mentioned, as Karen mentioned, is Danyel Haughton. She's the PSAC LGBTQ2+ and Women's Human Rights Officer. But some, I don't know, might know on the call that she's actually from BC, but will soon be relocating to Ontario. So welcome, Danielle, and thank you for joining us. We really appreciate that. And folks, we'll see in the background that we have the ever and ongoing support of Patrick Bragg, our political communications officer, which will help us throughout the different series that we've been talking about. We did try to choose different issues from our survey that PSAC did nationally, and so that's going to be some of the panel series that you'll be seeing over the next couple of weeks, as I mentioned. And also in terms of choosing this particular issue, some of that background that some of you might be familiar with is the fact that the PSAC did a gender equity survey and a major task force report that came out earlier this year at the end of April. And so some of those things are going to be a bit of what we'll talk about today, and we're really happy to hear from the experiences of both Danielle and Karen and our perspectives. And I'll get to mention a thing or two as well, so hopefully that'll be well received as well. The chat is open, and what we'd like to talk about for now is to feel free to comment throughout this period, but try to hold the questions to the part we do have a portion in our time to ask questions. That way it's easier for myself, who will be moderating the question, to locate all your questions. So feel free to chat and comment. We definitely want to see what you're thinking of the conversation as we're going along into the chat, and hold your questions to the end. So maybe I think we wanted to start off with some engagement from yourselves. I think Danielle, you wanted to walk us through a couple of questions.
Yeah, so we wanted to do a quick poll just here in Zoom to sort of get your take on something, see where you're at in terms of talking about gender equity, women's issues, and the election. So the first poll question, if we can put it up, going into the September 20th federal election, how familiar are you with gender issues that have been realized or brought into focus as a result of the ongoing pandemic? So your options are very familiar, somewhat familiar, not feeling that familiar, or you're not sure, you don't know. So if you could take a few seconds to pop in your answer and let us know how you're feeling about the election and the issues. Give about 5 more seconds. All right. Can we take a look at the results? All right, so we have a mix. So 27% of us feeling very familiar, exactly 27% also feeling somewhat familiar, and quite a few folks feeling not very familiar. So you've come to the right place. We definitely want to spend some time talking about these issues, getting some clarity, giving you time to ask questions as well, so that you're feeling more confident. All right, so let's go into the next question. And this time around, we want to know, in your opinion, what are the highest priorities for women in the upcoming federal election? And you can select all that apply. So if they all apply, select them all. If only some do. So, oh, sorry, it's single choice, unfortunately. But we can talk about it. So choose a single choice, but we can quickly just ask folks if there's another thing that came to mind. So give about 5 seconds. All right, let's take a look. So we got a good mix: fighting systemic racism, affordable housing, childcare was up there, healthcare, pharmacare, job creation, and a just pandemic recovery. So thank you so much for these responses. Can I check in it with one or two people, maybe another one they would have selected? If anyone wants to quickly let me know. I see Christina.
Hi, Danielle. I picked a just pandemic plan, and then I sort of hummed and hawed between gender equity, which I felt like covers all of them. So I was trying to figure out one that covers everything.
Yeah, that's okay. And can I get one more person who could tell us maybe another one they would have picked if they'd be willing to share? Oh, I see from Michelle, job creation would have been added. Yeah, so hopefully we'll touch a little bit on all of these, but we can see some of the issues that folks are thinking about as we come up on the election. All right, I'm going to throw it back over to Monica to actually start our discussion.
Yeah, I think that obviously when we chose this particular panel, the question in terms of why must women be at the forefront is maybe to first break down a little bit about how women were impacted by the pandemic. So that can open it up for us. Maybe, what would you like to comment on that, Karen?
Thanks, Monica. What I wanted to mention was the fact that the previous women's coordinator, Kelly Sidhu, we worked together with all of the chairs, and we got a COVID-19 survey that we sent to all of the women in BC, and we had a huge result from that, getting information and finding out from the members, you know, what challenges they've come across, and you know, getting to know like how each person has been affected personally, and you know, looking at those results and finding out how domestic violence has been an issue, and you know, childcare and the expectation of looking after their children while they're still trying to work from home, and you know, looking after their elders as well. This on top of, you know, trying to look after the family unit in its entirety. I mean, those are just a few of the things. There are so many more, but you know, I'm really proud of the fact that we were able to do that survey and get the results that we got, to find out that our membership is feeling disconnected, and you know, and they're just not getting information. We're just not connected, and we need to make a change on that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that those were really key points, and I'm glad that you acknowledged Sister Kelly Sadhu's work, because she was really a driver in having that survey done, and a driver in the sense that also we wanted it to be very time specific. So this was something that captured, the survey was conducted, you know, between November and December, you'll remember, Karen, and last year. And so this had captured kind of the experiences of women about 6 months after we had been primarily hit by the pandemic since March of 2020. Yeah, like you said, it was also well received. We hoped that women felt they could comment when they could. And if they couldn't, they would just answer the questions. So they were given those options. And a lot of women shared their stories. It was captured in our survey report, which is on our regional website. We tried to also depict in some of the graphs. And that's what you saw, is that even though a large proportion of our members did work from home, all of those things that you mentioned, you know, responsibilities at home, childcare, you know, groceries, all of it still increased in terms of their responsibility as women. And so where there was this expectation that during this time of, you know, monumental crisis in terms of the pandemic, a lot of that responsibility still fell to the women in the household. We had, you know, maybe a couple of isolated sharings where they were the main breadwinners, and so it was actually a little bit of a role reversal, but that was a very small minority of the respondents at the time. And so for folks who haven't seen that as of yet, you know, feel free to look at it. Again, it gives you a good snapshot of some of that impact. And what I'd say, because I work with the women's committees, that I really liked was that because we were able to also bring the data by regions, each women's committee has done something with the results of those surveys in their own complete unique way. You know, like, you know, if one committee said, oh, well, it was about isolation. Okay, so what they did is they did a whole reach out initiative, right? Or another one's like, oh no, what we need is a leadership retreat. And so they created that for themselves, right? And that's what I absolutely loved about seeing that. So they really got something out of the survey itself. So are we thinking now that we want to think about more about why, since we're saying that, you know, this is kind of how there are those impacts? Should we touch on a little bit about why, you think?
Yeah, why were these impacts greater on women than they were on men?
Yeah, well, I think that what I probably want to focus on is think about it more specifically in BC. It's a lot of the things that we probably can see, hopefully, is actually that it became visible because of the pandemic. So if we think about the industries that were heavily impacted, these were a lot of high ratio industries that had women working in them. So not only healthcare kind of was kind of the easy one to say. So healthcare nurses, health aides, you know, but also the janitorial staff of the hospital industry and this kind of thing, right? But also, I mean, even our members, for example, we have members at the BC First Nations Health Authority. So healthcare was kind of one of the easier visible ones. But if we think of all the frontline customer service ones, we have members in Purelator who they were essential workers, right? They still had to go. The mail, you know, all the shipping, all that kind of thing still had to go. So we still had members who had to show up for work. They were not part of the predominantly, members responding to the survey saying that they had to work from home. In BC, we're heavily supporting Unite Here, who has, hundreds of women and men, but mostly racialized women and immigrant women, by the way, who have been laid off by the employers because they're using these clauses where there is no more work, and so they're gone. But now, from my understanding of the issue, is that now that the industry is picking back up, they have the option. They could recall these workers, but because they have seniority and they have higher wages, they don't want those workers, right? So, Unite Here has a big fight on their hands there, and PSAC BC is part of a boycott agreement where we're boycotting all of the hotels that Unite Here members are at until 2022, hoping for this resolution. So, it's the industries they're in, also that they are at a higher risk for COVID because of those industries, because of being frontline workers and healthcare workers. And then, as Karen talked about with childcare and responsibilities at home and things like that, then if they were laid off, or if there was a gap to be filled, if a lot of the women are in lower wages, then it would be a choice, right? Well, if we don't have childcare, if we don't have elder care, between the, in most heterosexual relationships, who's going to be the one who stays home? Then the woman is the one who stays home, right? So then that was the other impact. So there's, I think in BC, again, like I said, a lot of it has become visible because of the pandemic, and maybe that's a positive thing in that respect. And so that's why now the pressure really has to be, how do we keep that visibility so that we understand those impacts as key to the recovery? I don't know.
Absolutely. I agree that the pandemic really just showed a lot of people, because many were aware, but some people for the first time, these inequalities that always existed. But the pandemic exacerbated them, deepened them, particularly, as Monica was saying, for racialized folks, for folks working in the service industry, for women who are part of the LGBTQ2 plus communities. So already ways in which they're marginalized, they were further marginalized, and people had to make tough choices in and around care, in and around health and safety. So it deepened all of these already existing inequities.
So yeah, so I think that's why, in terms of this whole topic, then, how do we ensure that the recovery, puts women in the forefront? Like, what are some of our thoughts about that? Feel free to add your own thought in the chat in terms of answering that question. How do we make sure? Do we even see that as one of the prime things in the whole campaign trail right now? Like, what do you guys think? I'd love to hear your thoughts first, and then I might chime in a thing or two.
I'll go first. One of the ways that we make sure that recovery puts women and girls at the forefront is increasing women's leadership at every level of government, in our not-for-profits, in our businesses, especially women from communities that have been historically marginalized. Women need to be at the table, and not alone. It doesn't work if it's one woman at the table. All different types of women need to be where decisions are being made, and they need to be decision makers. And we need to be electing and supporting folks who have connections to our communities. They can't be like, they have to be already be accountable to our communities, have ties, and are listening to the feedback from women, from marginalized women, from women who are frontline workers, so that they can bring these issues to the forefront, and that they can make sure that the people are speaking are the people impacted, because we want to speak for ourselves, So that's really important. It's not just putting women there, but women who are thinking about accountability and thinking about the ways in which all women are different and have different experiences.
And to build on that, Danielle, I think you're absolutely right. And I think, even in our unions, we need to do that as well. And we need to get more women represented at our executives and on our committees, and making sure that our voices are heard. And in order to do that, we need to also reach out to our members and ensure that they're having their voices heard, and know that you know, there are places that they can come and we can have those discussions and we can work together collaboratively. Our women's committees throughout our province are, you know, they're doing that, and we need to continue that, and we need to take it forward and ensure that, you know, we're doing that not just there, but also within our communities. And, you know, even in our little towns, you know, there's lots of voices that aren't being heard. And, you know, the election is a time that we can get that. And even if it's helping people get to the election sites as well, right? Like looking after our neighbor's child so that they can go and have their voices heard, instead of, you know, not being able to do it because they're stuck at home looking after their kids. So it's tenfold everywhere we go.
Christina, I see your hand. Is it a comment on how you think we can get the women at the forefront of this recovery? You want to make a comment? Go ahead. Oh, I don't know. Patrick, are you there we go.
Hi, I just wanted to comment on the fact that what you guys are saying is really important. I noticed up at bargaining, for instance, this was my first year. Many of the guys would come up to compete when we were competing for the election, and they would come up and they would say, women are already here. They're already representing the tables here, guys, for UNDE. They're already here. And it was like 60% of the women were clerical workers, right? They're clerks. And that guy thought that clerks represented all women. That's what he was saying, essentially, right? Well, there's enough women already here, guys. There's 60%. Well, 60% of the women make up clerks, not women in trades, not women in the working as cooks, not women working as electricians, not firefighter women, not any of the SV table, like the trades table, right? And so we have to really, I don't know what it is about our switch, but numbers don't always indicate diversity. In fact, numbers can really lie about diversity because they can be filling quotas. So I think one of the ways that we really have to look at our union is to make sure that we're not falling into that as well, that we're not getting one type of person representing and one type of person in leadership. So that was just my little 2 bits. Thanks, guys.
No, it's a good point, and I think that's why it connected with, you know, what Danielle was saying about when we do look at leadership. I think I haven't been scanning all of the parties, but I only have noticed one particular party who actually talked about their own statistics per se of their candidates, right? And, you know, maybe Danielle talk about that, or I can chime in if she doesn't. But I haven't seen, you know, some of these other parties talking about that, and that's one part of the puzzle for sure. And I hear you too, Christina, about when you talk about looking at the data, because even when Karen talked about our results of our COVID-19 and women's survey that we did last year, if you first look at the results about the question on childcare, quite a lot of our women actually, it was a not applicable question because it wasn't an issue for them at that time. So that was one thing. So you can look at that and you can say, okay, well then that's not an important issue for PSAC BC women. However, we dug deeper, because then when you actually saw for those who it did apply to, the chart went off in terms of how much childcare responsibilities increased for them. So it was a great conversation for us to have with all the different women's committees to say, don't just dismiss it to say, oh, well, the majority of the women right now are saying it's not an issue for them. Don't forget about the women who said, well, it is an issue for me. And for those who said it was, childcare increased, you know, so much. And so I love that, you know, looking at the nuance of the data and not just, you know, one box or not, but the multi-layers of that for sure. And that's one of the things, I mean, I think speaking of childcare, it's one of the reasons why next week's political action webinar is going to speak to that. We're hosting that, and we have one of our members who's on our call today, Neil and Chan, who will be joining us with that, as well as Sharon Gregson. And that's one of the things I would say in terms of how to put it, you know, put the women in the front of the recovery. Initially, childcare was a bit, I found, in the media during the campaign trail, but it might be getting lost. And while some folks feel that, you know, we shouldn't always talk about childcare as a women's issue, because it absolutely is a societal issue. It impacts the economy, right? If you're having 50% of your population impacted by not being able to work because they don't have childcare, at least 50%, then it's a major impact on your economy, right? But on the other hand, as we just talked about, for when we're hit in a moment of crisis, who does the responsibility seem to always tend to fall back on? We have to absolutely acknowledge that it's on women. And so then it is up to all of us who are on this call to help continue to bring that to the forefront, because we are kind of in this precipice where there could be these, historic agreements, and it just kind of depends on what the results are after September 20th, on whether or not we're going to actually move forward finally on this front. Speaking as a woman who has a young child, but a child outside of that childcare bracket, right? Like she's not under 6 anymore, but it's still something that I'm heavily invested in. And I was heavily invested in that issue even before I had a child. And so I think that helping us understand when we're talking about women's issues and putting that at the front of the recovery, we're talking about half of the population, first of all, but we're also talking about how these different issues impact us differently, and acknowledge that, right? And own that, and don't apologize for it, and make sure that it comes to the forefront, and maybe even start, I don't know, a media thing to say, hey, where are the questions about women? What's going on this campaign trail, to all of our media folks? But speaking of that campaign trail, I think it's really important. Let me just see what we have in the chat here to see if we can share Michelle's comment. We achieved gender pay equity and legislation implemented in the public service. What about other sectors? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and is there still really that genuine pay equity? Are we still moving towards that even in the public service? It would be a question I have. She continues on with saying working mothers come home to the second shift. Absolutely. Acknowledging that all that unpaid, unequal division of labor, and people who want to, moms who want to further their education and advance their careers. So we definitely would hear that support. Thanks for that comment, Michelle. That's really important. So I think, we should really hear kind of, where do we see that the three parties, main kind of parties nationally anyways, are at? What do you think about that? Maybe Danyel, I'll lead to you first as our Women's Human Rights Officer here for PSAC nationally. Where are they at? Oh, my friend, I get to say you are on mute. There we are. Thanks.
You missed a golden nugget there. No. I wanted to go through sort of, pardon my French, quick and dirty for each party, some key issues. And I want to remind everyone, if you're a woman and it's an issue for you, it's a woman's issue. So no more pigeonholing, right? And even if it's not an issue for one woman, it might be an issue for another woman. So for each party, I did 3 of the same thing: affordable childcare, gender equity, and a just pandemic recovery. But the first one, I sort of switched it up between the parties, at my leisure. So starting with the Liberal Party, paid sick leave. They're moving towards 10 days of paid sick leave for all federally regulated workers, and convening provinces and territories to develop a national action plan to legislate sick leave across the country. So for me, yes, excellent paid sick leave, but everyone should be entitled to it, right? So that's what we feel is missing there. Next, affordable childcare. Again, the $10 a day childcare plan. Some provinces have already signed on. What we like is they're talking about the wages of people who provide the childcare, and they're talking about the quality of the childcare. Wish we were seeing a little bit more about how accessible for northern communities, rural communities, and Indigenous communities. Some language there. Wish it was stronger. Next, gender equity. So as of August 31st, the Pay Equity Act came into effect, because even though there's been this push, more women in the workplace, over the previous 30 years, we were still seeing more and more women being discriminated in the workplace in terms of pay equity. So I think this is important. What's missing here is it's still complaint-based, so someone has to make a complaint. I'm going to move on to, a just pandemic recovery. So what we thought was key was better employment insurance systems to support gig workers, self-employed people, and to give more workers financial security. And a lot of women are working in the gig economy. But the increases were modest, and we saw how devastated the gig economy was. So after this example, we wanted to see something a bit stronger. All right, the conservative platform. So fighting systemic racism. So there is a plan to combat online hate speech, and they're talking about with the goal of still preserving free speech and wanting to use the criminal justice system to enforce it. But what we thought was missing was there was really no mention of systemic racism, how it operates on an institutional level, on a societal level. Next, affordable childcare. So their approach was providing direct payments to families in an effort for them to make a choice about childcare. From a personal note, I always want to see more money in the hands of our members, but what we feel is missing is there's no effort to increase accessibility, availability, or the quality. So having this money, but there's no spaces, that's a problem for us. And we always want to see, we're a union, how are the people providing these services being compensated? And that is missing. Next, gender equity. So the Conservatives are getting tough, wanting to get tough on talking about domestic violence, sexual exploitation, and providing $100 million over the next 5 years to support training for non-police services. What we feel missing here is we want to see it collaborative with communities, and is it looking at it on a societal level, right? The criminal justice is sort of a band-aid if we're not thinking about how are these things coming to act, what are the deeper inequities, how are we fighting that? And last but not least, for Conservatives, a just pandemic recovery. So they want to take immediate action to help the hardest hit sectors, helping those, including women and young Canadians who have suffered the most. So they recognize that women have been disproportionately impacted. But this isn't accompanied with any paid sick leave and not like a firm plan on how this would be action to help women in pandemic recovery. Finally, the NDP. So first I have healthcare. NDP has championed universal healthcare, publicly funded healthcare, and expanding it to include pharmacare and dental care, and having access to folks seeking gender confirming surgery across the country. In terms of affordable childcare, also in support of a universal childcare program with appropriate wages and benefits for child care workers, and expanding parental care leave so that folks have more options. While I'm always happy for more options, some of the options were taking more money and less weeks. And we always want to encourage people to take parental care and bond with their children. But we do like to see the choice. Finally, for gender equity, a national action plan to end gender-based violence, and updating the Canadian Labour Code to include 10 paid sick days for all federally regulated workplace. And looking at domestic violence training for police, domestic violence and sexual assault training for police and universities. And in terms of a just pandemic recovery, implementing strong health safeguards for people returning to work, making sure that it's easier for people to join unions to protect their rights, and 10 paid sick leave days for all federally regulated workplaces. So again, those were just little tidbits. I didn't want to take too much time, but I wanted to give you some thoughts on what was there and what we felt was missing.
Thanks for that, Danielle. No, I completely recognize that, it's hard to do kind of a whole roundup. And as you said, if it's an important issue to ourselves, and if we're women, then it's a women's issue, hence, right? So it is difficult to kind of do that summarization. I appreciate that you were able to do that for us. So looking at the time, I think that we have a couple of minutes here to see if folks have some questions. If you feel comfortable, you could put up your hand and I'll watch for your hand and we'll have you ask your question. Or if you'd like to put it in the chat, we can also do that and then see, we don't promise that we have the answers, but we can promise to ask your question if it's asked in the next couple minutes. And for those who are not following the chat, that Patrick also mentioned that the PSAC's full platform analysis will be ready on Friday, so you can watch for that on the website. Who has some questions or comments? I see Nadia has a comment. Go ahead, Nadia.
Hi, sorry. I had to walk back to my office. I don't really get a lunch, so I'm kind of working and listening. One thing that I kind of noticed during the pandemic, especially in the first year of it, was that I feel that a lot of women that I knew were really burning out, right? Like there's all these individual issues, but they all culminate to a sense of exhaustion. And basically, I personally saw people being involved in less, even though there were opportunities to become involved. There were some decreases in attendance on certain committees, even at work, at my workplace, certain things that we would do that we could have still done, we just didn't, right? For morale or what have you for the community. So I know there's no easy answer to this, but if this is kind of our next, and maybe it's not really related to the election, but I do think it is, because the more voices we have, the more people that get involved, the louder our voice is going to be, and the more that our questions are going to be asked. But if everybody is just so burnt out, how do we help people rejuvenate? How do we help each other do that? And then how do we encourage people to get involved, even if it's what someone may think is a small thing? Many hands make light work, right? So how do we engage more people, but not ask so much of them that they are burning out, or also keep in mind that they might be at that point already? Anyway, that's just kind of my comment. I don't think there's a really great answer other than trying to keep connected, but if anyone has any ideas.
It's a great question, Nadia. Thank you for raising it. Looking to our panelists to see if anyone wanted to comment further on that.
I'd like to go.
Go ahead.
I have been, in some activist communities learning about how radical rest is and claiming it as women. And there's a whole group called Rest for the Resistance. And I hope you look it up, but it encourages us to resist and tells us we deserve rest and we won't be at our best without rest, and we're not failing people when we take a rest, so that we can be powerful and we can speak. And I know that's hard for us because we see the problems. You came here because you're seeing the problems, you want to be informed, but it's okay to take that rest. And if you need someone's permission, I give you permission. Take that rest, own it, and then when you're ready, do the work. But it's okay if you're not ready.
Karen, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I did actually. I just to piggyback up on that, Danielle, thank you, because that is exactly what I think is necessary, is that sometimes we need to take the time, and when I say that, I mean take the time and sever your ties, so to speak, and literally don't just dabble in things, actually take the time to rest. And then when you feel like you've rejuvenated, then look back at the notes of things that have happened and get educated and up to date. And then, do as you can. And sometimes coming back doing things at a lighter rate than what you did before. But the thing is, you absolutely need to take the time, I'm going to touch on this in October, but learn to say no. we all need to learn to say no. It is okay to say that, to say I'm at my limit and I can't do any more. The other thing is that reaching out to people and saying, like, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed and I need help. That's all I can offer at this point. Thank you.
No, thanks for that. That's good. And I think the only thing I'd add before I go to Christina and then Michelle's question, and then we'll probably be at our time, is to say sometimes taking that rest creates the need for others to step up. And they will not step up until the space is there, the void is there, or the need is there. So as much as we want to think that we are irreplaceable, and we are all irreplaceable individuals, but in terms of the different things that we can do for society, I'm a big believer actually in replicating myself and helping other people become organizers so that they do for themselves. And that's sometimes the thing, is that when you're not there, they realize, oh, I can do this, and maybe I have to do this because so and so is not there. But also, I would say to leave it open to be the conduit, because people will still come to you if they recognize you in that role. And then you can just say, okay, well, I can't help you right now, but here's who can if you're interested in getting involved. And be open to being that conduit, like don't like completely be that thing. That's the only other thing I would say. So Christina, if you have your question, if we can unmute your mic, and then I'll go to Michelle's question if we still have a chance. Thanks.
Why don't you go to Michelle first? I've spoken already, so make sure Michelle gets a chance.
Appreciate that. So Michelle's question in the chat was, have you observed which political party has more women advisors in behind the scenes on the campaign trail? I'll pivot that over to Danyel to see if she's had that observation or what you thought about that question.
I actually haven't made that observation. I've been so into what the platforms are that I don't have that info, but you mentioned that you have noted a party that provided that info.
It was not so much the women advisors behind the scenes, but what I did see was the New Democratic Party reporting how many of their candidates were women right across the country, and also of other diversity backgrounds. And I haven't seen that as of yet from the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party. And so that's what I was mentioning in terms of that. I don't know if I would know behind the scenes regardless, unless we were closer to those parties individually anyways. Oh, I don't know, Patrick, you have your hand up. Is it a comment on it? Maybe you have some background information. Go ahead, Patrick, and then we'll go to hopefully Christina.
Thanks, Monica. I thought I'd offer my 2 cents because I have been following the election quite closely. I have absolutely no empirical evidence, but my guess would be, if I had to do it, if this were a Jeopardy question, I would say the NDP. Their chief of staff is a woman. Their national campaign director is a woman. Their vice president is a woman. Their treasurer is a woman. And as Monica said earlier, the NDP, I think the stat was 54% of their candidates across the country are women. So that's just a little bit better, I guess, than the average population. But again, that's just purely my sense of it, Michelle. Hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Patrick. Christina, would you like to still ask your question right before we end?
Hi, I just wanted to ask a question for people who are survivors who have survived intersectional discrimination over the last however long. I know this year has been a year where a lot of that has been brought to the front for a lot of women. And I know for me, I found my power and I also found my pain kind of at the same time. And I think there needs to be a real place for survivors and survivorship within the union, within the employers, act within. I think that survivors need to come together as much as possible. And one of the things that I think survivors have answers. They sometimes are holding the wheels to help the cart go up the hill, and nobody's actually asking a survivor how to help push the cart. They're not. Meanwhile, the survivors are holding the wheel to get that cart up the hill. So it's more. I don't know the answer, but I would like to know what we're doing about making sure survivors are given a seat at the table to help make some of this stuff better. Particularly intersectional discrimination. I think that's where survivors really belong. Thank you very much.
No, I think that's an excellent comment, Christina. I don't know if anyone wanted to mention, but what I was going to just comment on that is going back to Danielle's analysis of something from the Conservative Party, for example. So if they are talking about sexual violence and working on that, the critique there is that they were primarily looking at it from a criminal perspective and not from the community perspective, right? And so that's exactly what we would need to kind of come back at and say, when you're talking about this resources that you're sharing, is it coming back to survivor support communities? Are they coming back to these kind of organizations? And it's not more about who, how do we do it more in the, neighborhood watch or whatever kind of criminal support services they might be thinking about, right? Is what I would say. But I think that it was important that you raised that point for sure. I know we're a couple of minutes over time. I just want to ask if we can go to one question where we wanted to just ask, because this is our very first initiation of this webinars. Now that we've had this discussion, do you feel more knowledgeable about key election issues and how they impact women? So if I can get Patrick to launch that poll, your answer possibilities are, yes, I feel better informed. I feel somewhat more informed. I'm still not familiar with the issues and don't know, unsure. So before we go to our closing, and I know Karen wants to do a more formal closing in just a second, I'd love to see what your answers are. And I think that we can reveal the poll at this point. It looks like the majority of our folks have answered, which is great. You're right in the dead middle there. You have, yes, I feel better informed, which is fantastic. And I feel somewhat more informed, which is great. As Patrick mentioned, we know we'll have a full critique and analysis of where the parties are going to be at. So look for that on Friday on our national website. And I'll hand it over to Karen to close our session. Karen.
Thanks, Monica. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank all of you for attending. And thank you, Danyel, for taking the time today. The information and the resources that you've provided for us are phenomenal. I know for myself, the information you've given is really helped me solidify who I'm voting for on September the 20th. And like I said, I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your day and spending it with us. And I hope that, that we have given you enough information and you're feeling better informed about the issues that women are faced with, especially during this pandemic, and that you feel better equipped to make the best decision for yourself and for all of us collectively on September the 20th. So I think that we have a couple of resources that we were going to provide so that if people wanted to find out other information about the issues, like there's the gender task report, and on the PSAC website, there's the top election issues. Patrick's going to get that information out on Friday. And also, just to make sure to remind everybody that we have a couple of lunch and learns happening over the next couple of weeks. There's one tomorrow. Monica, can you remind us what that one is? I apologize.
No worries. That one particularly is about the pandemic and really what we mean by leaving no one behind. And so I think that that's going to be with Alex Hemingway from the CCPA. So that's the one that's tomorrow. And then the ones that are next week, we have the one that I mentioned we have one on public health care. So I don't know the person myself, but I do know that Audrey Ann Guai, I hope I'm pronouncing her last name correctly, is with the BC Health Coalition. So she'll be one of our resources for that one on the 14th. And on the 15th is the one that we talked about for the childcare, how that's central to the recovery as well. So it's gonna be kind of nice that we started off with women being at the forefront. Tomorrow now is about just recovery in general. We talk about healthcare next week and end off with childcare. So in terms of some of the comments in the chat saying that it would be good to do these more regularly. I think having conversations with all of us on these important issues all the time is absolutely part of continuing to move these issues forward, for sure.
Thank you. And I will make one more plug, and that is also for the women that are here today. I hope that each one of you are members of your women's committees and take the opportunity and, stay within your limit. Don't burn yourself out and do what you can, and, reach out when you need help as well. So thank you. Thanks again.